if you've watched my videos before, you'll know that I miss this time in the sort of burgeoning of consumer technology where everyone was trying something different, because now we're at a point where it's more so that things are just improving on the status quo in terms of like hardware, software, etc. And the competition between different corporations of who gets your money over who has a lot to do with the efficacy and the strength and the affordability and how those things intersect. It's not really, am I getting anything new with XYZ? That's something that's a continued fascination, for example, with Nintendo, the fact that they rely so heavily on their intellectual property, on Mario, on Zelda, and therefore they are able to sell hardware that is objectively weaker than its competitors without really any effort. But when something comes out that is not only outside of these huge corporations, but outside of that homogeny, we do tend to look at it with a bit of a side eye, because is this a gimmick? Is this a fad? Is this something that's going to let you down? But at the same time, then there's a lot of people who look at it and think, okay, but it's not following the trends and therefore it is bad because it is not progressive. And I think that kind of creates this like not ideal ecosystem for creativity. And we live in capitalism. Capitalism breeds monopoly, and we are conditioned to be okay with that. So it is so beautiful to me that there is one device, one company out there who is defying all of that. And that is Panic's Pizza. Wait, sorry, no. Panic's Playdate. I'm your cool Uncle Marissa, and the Playdate is probably my favorite thing in terms of modern technology, contemporary technology. And this video is hard for me to make because in a way I feel like I don't know what the point is, sort of to talk about why I'm making this video. Point one, I love the Playdate, and I think talking about things that we love is really important. As I've grown older, I enjoy watching videos a lot more where people are talking about something they enjoy, something they love, or really boosting a product or experience that brings them joy, more so than people who are really trying to find things to latch onto and be negative about. Now, of course, when it comes to product reviews, I appreciate honesty above all, which is very difficult to mitigate in terms of YouTube. That's a topic for another video or just discussion, but there is some sense of joy to be spread in that. So, you know, part of me is like, well, I want to spread this joy, this love for the Playdate. I do have a video where I unboxed my Playdate after getting it, after like wanting one for so long. And I think that I pretty accurately convey my joy in that video. So that does already exist, arguably. So we will go on to the second reason. I've had people ask me sort of like, well, do you still actually use your Playdate? And, you know, there's this idea that anyone who has a YouTube channel is really well off and people just send them things, and that's really not true for me. I don't consider myself well off, and I didn't even have a channel when the Playdate launched, so they would have had no reason to send it to me. I'm not beholden by anything. It was something that I wanted. And so because of that, I think a lot of it is like, oh, you know, you get excited about this new thing and then you don't actually use it. So do you actually use it? And it would be dishonest to say I don't, because I do, and I adore it. And so that made me want to make a follow-up, but I've been kind of conflicted on how to follow it up, because I was like, well, should I do a review of season 1? Should I do like a review? But, you know, a review invites things like, yeah, well, XYZ, and like, you didn't mention this. And how can I unbiasedly review something that I love so much? And then the third reason I thought like it would be nice to make a video about the Playdate is I've had people who kind of approach it with either misconceptions, with what they feel it's lacking. And essentially the most overarching thing is comparing it to other game consoles, which, like I said earlier, it's getting almost to the point where it doesn't matter what console you have, you can play those games on a different, like on any of them. So it comes down to like aesthetics, price, like any sort of subscription service. And again, the only one that stands out is Nintendo because of their IP. That's like what holds it together. But because that's what consumers are used to, that's the comparison they make. So valid. So then it's the struggle of, well, what format do we want this video in, right? And I have landed on love letter. So this video is going to be a love letter to the Playdate. Think about it like if I made a video talking about how much I love my girlfriend, if you left a comment and you were like, well, I don't like that your girlfriend has brown hair, I prefer blondes, like, okay, I don't care, I love her. Like, so I'm not here to like sell you something or change your mind or convince you of something. I'm just here to say how much I love the Playdate and why. So if you want to fight with someone about why you adamantly dislike something that has absolutely no financial gain for you or the person talking about it, maybe find a different video to argue with them about it, or try Reddit. People love arguing on Reddit. So let's get to it. The first question that I asked myself was, who is the Playdate for? Because initially I was like, well, it's for people who like games, right? But I realized that there are tiers. So I would like to break it down into, for example, people who like movies. If you stop any stranger on the street and ask, hey, do you like movies? They'll probably say yes. And then when you go into like their habits, they probably have vastly different habits from each other in terms of how they actually engage with movies. So let's go like to the first person. So they are like super casual movie watcher. It's not, they wouldn't consider it a hobby. They like prefer to like maybe read books or play games when they have free time. But if a movie's on, they'll watch it. If someone has said, look, like you really have to watch this movie, they've heard it from a bunch of people, like you really have to watch this movie, and like it's a cultural icon, for example, they probably have seen the Barbie movie and or Oppenheimer, and they were like, yeah, that's good. And then from there, a step up, you have the person who pretty actively likes to watch movies. So if they have some free time, they're like, what do? I'm gonna like go on Netflix and find a movie to watch. This person also has an awareness of what movies are actually out and are popular. Like they don't need someone to recommend that they go watch the Barbie movie. And they probably like pay a bit more attention to movies as well while they are watching it. They enjoy going to the theater. And then we go a step above them. And this is the person who like is aware of like all of the movies that are out right now. They watch the trailers of what's coming up. They like keep an eye on like what's going to be getting Oscar nominations. Maybe they even have their own opinions on that. This is the person that you get like recommendations from of like what movie should I go watch at the moment. Like when they have free time or free evening or free afternoon, they go to the movie theater. They like want to keep up with what is current in the movies. And then above that, you have the person who just loves, it's not even movies at this point, they love film. Yeah, they will watch what's in the movie theater right now, but they're also going to film festivals, they're watching indie films, they will go to like retrospectives of films and watch old films, they like watching foreign films, they might even go to talks by directors, and this person is like the treasure trove of knowledge. This is the person that even the one who like loves movies and like actually goes and like actively goes to the movie theater and watches movies when they come out will ask like, hey, do you have any recommendations for me? Because this person is encyclopedic. They're not about like watching just what is new, or for example, someone who's just like interested in a specific genre. They are interested in the art of all of it, and they are interested in like knowing everything that's there and like what inspired what and appreciating the technicalities of it. This is like the uber nerd. And of course, all this is very simplistic. You know, there are people, for example, I myself for a while was very like up and on it with like French films and with animated films, but not anything else really. So obviously these are not the only kinds. So where does the Playdate fit in that? I think the Playdate is for the person, that uber nerd, the one who like really just loves You know, you love games. You don't care, like, you're not drawn to a game because it has good graphics or necessarily even because of the genre. You just love the art form. You love trying different things, and you love seeing what people make regardless of their status. You don't care if it's a AAA studio. You don't care if it's some guy working like out of his living room after his 9 to 5. And two other people that I think it could be for the person who takes recommendations, who might be interested in it but doesn't know yet until the uber nerd tells them like, hey, no, you would actually love this because I noticed that you like to play a lot of puzzle games, and this has a lot of puzzle games on it. And it could be for that one person that I didn't categorize, of the person who loves niche things. For example, if you actually actively like love indie games and games who have only like 1 or 2 people behind them, then you are missing a whole plethora of people without the Playdate. And so that's who it's for. And this is not to like look down on anyone, you know, like I'm gonna say I love movies, like I love making movies, but I'm not like the uber nerd. I am not even the person who's able to watch like every single movie that's out currently. So no one is better than someone else. I just think that it's targeted at like a pretty specific kind of person who would go for it. I think this is also good to keep in mind because I think it's very easy for us to assume that everyone consumes and enjoys and engages the same way that we do. For example, something that really drew me into games was the discovery of JRPGs and the stories that are so complex and gripping in these games. But for a while I thought, oh yeah, that's why people like games. So then when people are like, yeah, no, I just play Call of Duty with my friends, I was like, what? This doesn't have a story. But no, because they play games for a different reason, and those things aren't even mutually exclusive. All right, games. So let's talk about the games and what I like about the games. So first off, this is a very contentious opinion. Handheld gaming does not currently really exist. The reason this is contentious is there are two genre of devices that people consider handheld, which a lot of people, myself included, vehemently do not consider to be handheld. One is handheld PCs. The Steam Deck, the ROG Ally, any of those things. Dare I say even the Nintendo Switch. Why? You hold them in your hands. Yes. Okay, the form factor is handheld, but the games are not really exclusive to that platform. So the fact that my Steam Deck can play The Witcher on deck does not make The Witcher 3 a handheld game in the same vein as Game Boy Advance games, DS games, 3DS games, Game Boy games, WonderSwan games, all of those things. What we have is a full-fledged big game that was not designed specifically for that miniature form. We just happen to have been able to miniaturize it. And with the Switch, arguably same thing, because these games are not built from the ground up to be used as a handheld. They are games that you can dock and see on the big screen. A lot of the games, the indie games especially, are games that are on other platforms that are home consoles, and even Nintendo's own games, they are not akin to the games that were released for their handheld devices. They are akin to their home console games. And I think this is the most tangible with Pokemon, because Pokemon on the Switch I feel like is the least attractive Pokemon, and that's because they are having to expand what Pokemon is, having to expand the graphics, the things there are to do, trying to make it maybe open world, trying to do all of these things that are a lot more akin to home console games than handheld. And my thoughts on Pokemon are they would have been a lot more at home on a true dedicated handheld, and then we could have things on the home console that were kind of more weird, the way that Pokemon did do Pokemon releases for home consoles that were kind of weird. So no, I don't consider any of these to be handheld in anything except form factor. And yes, I'm aware that technology progressing means that we can have things on a handheld form factor that we couldn't necessarily have in the past. You know, you couldn't have what was on GameCube on a Game Boy Advance, much to the chagrin of young Marissa. However, then we get into the argument of what I was kind of talking about earlier, of like, when does tech, like just going with whatever is the most advanced capabilities, start to eat its own tail? I'm not speaking on a specific game right now because I'm that person who doesn't actually really play AAA games. I mainly play like indie games and like things that will kind of pique my interest for a variety of reasons. But I have heard a lot of complaints that the more graphical fidelity we have and the more expansive worlds people are able to create, the lazier it seems to become on things like writing, on character, on even just the justification of why are we making this and why is the world so open and like why do people look the way they do. Things are getting a lot more kind of, I always just think about this meme that I can't find. If I can find it while editing this, I'll put it up, but it's comparing the two Friday the 13th. The remake and the original, and how in the original Mike Myers is like kind of in the darkness and Jamie Lee Curtis is in the foreground and it looks very menacing. But in the new one, you know, we have better cameras in low light conditions, but then they're both kind of equally lit. So Mike Myers just kind of looks like he's like, Mom, I have to go to the bathroom. There's an extent where we exchange realism for art. And I think one thing that also conveys that really well in gaming is games that have aged really well. For example, The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker has aged really well because it's a stylized game, and stylistic choices, artistic choices do not age. And, you know, games, for example, that did try for more of a realistic as far as they could back in the day, their graphics have aged poorly, but they can instead be propped up by things like good story, fun gameplay, etc., etc. So if we are going to go back in time and say, actually, Resident Evil on PS4 was an amazing game, then clearly games can be held up by things other than just their graphical fidelity and realism of the graphics. So yes, we do not have handheld gaming. What's the second type? What's the second genre that I disagree with? Emulation devices. A lot of people consider them, no, we have handheld gaming, it's emulation devices. What do emulation devices do? They emulate. What do they emulate? They emulate games from ye olden times. They emulate things like Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color. Nothing is original. Yes, they are handheld, but so is the original Game Boy Advance, so is the original Game Boy Color. And if you're like, oh, well, they also can emulate like GameCube and PS2. Yeah, so can your Steam Deck. At that point, we're again doing the thing of like making something handheld that is not inherently built for that. And it can be, and it can be a pleasant experience, but that's not the point. Now, I do have to disclaimer, I love handheld gaming as it is now. Like I said, Shigeru Miyamoto stole the idea from me because in college I was like, wouldn't it be amazing if I could just take this, like what I'm playing on my laptop, but have it on a small screen, like on a handheld device, and play it on the go. And he heard me and he took my ideas. So I love it. I really appreciate it. I think the Switch is such an amazing game console. I love it so much. I remember people being haters when it was first announced. People were mad that it was only 720p handheld and 1080p docked. People were saying, no one's gonna buy this. See where we are now? Yeah. And I think that that is a great example where we get to prop up this giant corporation and say, even when they did something different, people were like, that's never gonna work. But you underestimate how receptive people can be to innovation and to fun. In terms of like defining what is handheld gaming, I think if you ask me that, of like, well, what makes a game a handheld game? I think you're just kind of being purposefully obtuse. So I don't want to spend too much time just describing that, but I think it does have to do with making something for a handheld console with a lot of limitations in place and with a lot of consciousness of the situations in which the device, the handheld, is going to be played. And that's all I'm gonna say on that. So in terms of games, now coming directly to the Playdate. The Playdate is absolutely a handheld console. It has limitations. It has games that are largely can be very pick up and play, and even the games that aren't are a lot more minimal and things that you can engage with very deeply and disengage with very quickly. I'm going to be using footage in this video of me mirroring my Playdate to my computer, and you'll be able to see that it actually doesn't look great. Similarly, when I play Game Boy games on the Game Boy Player on GameCube, I'm like, yeah, it's cute, but it doesn't look right to me, you know? In the same way that playing like a GameCube game on a tiny emulation handheld is a bit like, this could be a lot better. And so I think that definitely defines this as a handheld. And something you hear a lot is people saying like, well, there's probably not a lot of games for it. And I'm not sure where this misconception comes from, because there's an insane amount of games for it. The one that people know about fairly universally is the season 1 of games. You get 24 games, and they're rolled out on a weekly basis, and I will talk about that a little bit later on, just the mindfulness and thoughtful consumption that the Playdate encourages as much as a device can. And let me tell you, having played every single one, none of them miss. Now, I'm not saying that I loved every single game from season 1, but I absolutely appreciated every single game from season 1. There are ones that I'm still addicted to and go back to. There are ones that were, you know, like just one complete narrative. And so I finished the narrative and I was like, God, I want more so bad because this was so good. And then the ones that like did not really vibe with me, the main reason for that is because they were trying to do too much. And I think that's kind of amazing. Like, imagine the flaw of your game being like, not that you didn't do enough, but that you tried to do too much. And I think that's kind of really cool. Another thing that people may not be aware of is the games are developed by little guys, by like independent people. And there's no like corporation behind the creation of these games. And so if you see a game that you like in that season, then that is someone that you can follow. For example, one of the games in season 1 was made by Dave Makes, who is a wonderful person, and Dave Makes worked on another game that is in the Playdate catalog, and I was like, it's so cool to kind of put those together. Moving on to the catalog. The catalog are things that have kind of passed Panic Playdate's, you know, little process of submission. Like they've been approved as being unique editions, interesting editions, high quality editions, and currently there are over 200 games on the catalog. Over 200 games. And this isn't the Steam shop, this isn't the Nintendo eShop where like there's shovelware. Like, these are games that have been screened, and every game that I've gotten from the catalog, I have thoroughly enjoyed. There are even catalog sales, and also the games are like between like $1 to like, I think maybe the most expensive game might be 10. That's insane for a game that like generally is going to have really good replay value, or it's just going to be a really good contained experience. How can you say no to that? And then where else can you find games? On itch.io, itch.io, I've heard both. If you look up the Playdate Git tag, you get over 1,000 results. Now, of course, not every single game is going to be amazing because these are just, anyone can upload them. But the thing is, you have a vast number of free games as well. There are games that are on the catalog, but you have the free version on itch.io, and that just means maybe you have a version that doesn't have the most recent updates, or maybe it's just that you don't have like the global high scoreboard. Could be a variety of differences, but a lot of the times they're similar enough that, especially if people who have it for free on itch.io and then paid on the catalog, it's like a full demo. One example of that is Root Bear, which is a very famous, like probably one of the most famous games on the Playdate. Is a lot of fun, bit of a high score chaser, very lovely graphics. You can get that for free off itch.io, and then you can get the paid version off the catalog. Furthermore, I'm not a game developer, nor do I have any ideas percolating for a game myself, but with multiple ways to build a game for the Playdate, you can make your own. There are people who've like gotten it and made their first ever game for it. There are people who've gotten it for people they know who are interested in getting into game development, and it's like started their like efforts into making games. It's incredibly accessible, and there is just so much happening in terms of games to play. Yeah, they're not AAA games, but this isn't for someone who only plays AAA games, right? And in terms of genre, there are many genres. Just thinking of stuff I have on mine, high score chasers, arcade games, shmups, RPGs, platformers, even apps. They're not all super useful, but like, for example, there's like a drawing app, which I think is really endearing, but very challenging to use. There is like a kind of beat making app, which is very cool because especially if you want sounds for your Playdate game. There is a music box app where you can like crank it and play music box songs, but you can also make your own songs. There's music visualizers. Yeah, quite a number of apps which vary in usefulness, but are all very equally brilliant in their creativity. I think there might be some rhythm games. I'm not sure because I really want rhythm games on the Playdate, and I know at least people are working on them. But yeah, anything, like any genre that you can think of exists on the Playdate. There's also a lot of like clones and inspired games. For example, Core Fault, which was made by Dave Makes, and Squid God is a Vampire Survivors like. I'm pretty sure there are Balatro likes. There's a Suika clone, literally named like legally distinct Suika clone. So if there is like a genre that's very specific that you really like, you probably will find something like that as well. And season 2 is coming. Honestly, was not ready for that. I didn't expect there to be a season 2, but there is, and that is a testament to not only Panic believing in this device and really supporting it, of like, this is not just a gimmick that they threw out to the masses and are just collecting checks from, and it also speaks a lot to the community and to how much people who are making games and playing games for the Playdate really love it and really want to continue to support it. So I, for one, am so excited for season 2. Something I was alarmed to hear in terms of games is people asking, like, can you emulate Game Boy games on it? Can you emulate like XYZ? It's so confusing. Why would you want to emulate games on it? I don't understand. It has an insane amount of games available to it on it, and you can emulate like Game Boy games on anything. Your cell phone probably can very easily. A dedicated emulator is very cheap. Use your computer, your laptop. It's not hard to run them. And that question also really makes me sad because, first off, you are judging the worth of a Playdate, which has unique games made for it by unique creators. Again, something you already know, have already played, they've already been paid. Like, you can play anywhere else. Like, you only find value in this if it lets you play other games that aren't dedicated to it. Why? That's so weird. And then there's also kind of a hypocrisy in that question, which is very funny to me, because why do you want to emulate Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, whatever games? It's because you have a fondness for those handheld games, and you would love to relive them. So why a fondness for those and a resistance to this new iteration of what handheld games can be, which absolutely have a lot of the same charm and a lot of the same reason for enjoyment, if not more, because they come with the quality of life updates and they come with the mindset of someone who plays games in the 21st century 2020s. So they're going to be more enjoyable to play. They're going to be more streamlined. That's another very interesting thing about the games, is because they are being made today, even though it has like more of a lo-fi look to it, the way that it plays, it's very, very modern. So that's a terrible question. And the answer I think is like yes, but very poorly. Like it can emulate, but very poorly. But again, why would you do that? Why would you do that? So we've been talking a lot about community, kind of inadvertently. So I think it would be a nice transition to that. The Playdate Discord is one of the most wonderful internet spaces there is. It is so incredibly like queer friendly. It's like amazing. It's so incredibly like female non-binary friendly as well, which is absolutely amazing in a space which is so heavily straight cis male dominated, and often to a degree where a lot of men, not you who's writing your comment being like, I never did that. Yeah, we're not talking about you specifically, but a lot of men do push women out of the space. They do push queer people out of the space. They push trans people out of the space. So to have a community that very much is open, friendly, and vastly contributed to by a lot of folks who are not welcomed with open arms in other aspects of gaming communities is incredible. People also constantly are putting out playtesting requests for their games, and people are so enthusiastic to help with those. People who ask for help on their games, they get very like enthusiastic responses. People are always willing to help. It's a really amazing community. And the people at Panic, of course, are also very much integral to this. They are also very active in the Discord. They are vital to propping up this kind of community on their Playdate Direct, which is the equivalent of like the Nintendo Direct, propping up certain games, propping up creators, allowing them to bring their own flair to whatever game it is that they have made and are publishing on the catalog, and really just hyping people up and really supporting them. It's an incredible community. And now I'd like to talk about hardware, which I have kind of insinuated some thoughts on it already. So the Playdate screen is grayscale, right? It's just black and white. And that is an interesting choice, right? To not have color. However, it works. I've never played a game on it and thought, hey, this should have color. And also this type of display, the absolute just like crispness of the black and white is something that I don't know if you could necessarily get with color. I don't know, like what weird thing to get bent out of shape about when it really does not have any impact on the games themselves. On the topic of visuals, the greatest complaint people have, like the first thing, maybe you tell people like, I love the Playdate, they're like, well, does it have a backlight? Okay, cool. No, it doesn't have a backlight, it doesn't have a front light. But so where does that put us? It's completely usable anywhere you have a light source, usable with the light of nature, the sunlight, usable with the light of Tesla and Thomas Edison, whoever you credited to, electric light bulbs indoors. You know, usually you can turn on the light. It's a very strange complaint because the screen is so crisp. If you have light, you can use it. Furthermore, there are things that are called, book lights. A lot of people use book lights for them. You just clip it onto like this, and it just whoop, light goes here. Incredible. Some people have come up with a lot more creative solutions, one of which, fingers crossed, I will be doing a video on my channel. And yeah, it's just a very strange complaint to me. It helps a lot with the battery life, and if I may sort of tangent into my section on mindfulness, it's actually really nice to be able to like turn off when it's time to turn off. If I'm playing my Playdate and then it's bedtime and like my partner wants to go to sleep, turns off the lights, like I might as well go to sleep. It's healthier. We are so used to everything being accessible in every moment of the day, and blue light is the leading factor of sleep problems. Definitely, I thought that was BS, but like definitely, yeah. I've noticed even like when I use my phone in bed, I stay up longer than if I were to like play my Game Boy in bed. Weird. And so in that sense, the Playdate becomes a lot more like a book, in that it's something that can put you to rest if you are playing it to unwind at night, but it's not something that will keep you up. And I think that that's really nice and mindful, and I don't know, it's not something we see a lot these days. And to criticize something for being different, for lacking a feature that maybe you take for granted and to an extent is not necessarily healthy for you, and also a feature that can be very easily remedied, it feels a bit like waste your energy on complaining about something else. I don't know. And then we have the crank in terms of hardware. So the crank is interesting because I definitely was like, that's weird. Like, why? Another part of me was like, well, people aren't actually going to use the crank. Like, once the games come out, like, it's going to be forgotten. To me, the point of reference there a lot was the DS line and the touchscreen, even the 3DS and the 3D effect, which I didn't grow up with a 3DS. However, you know, I have some awareness that like the DS Lite, the gimmick aspect of those handhelds often went really unused by game developers. You had some games that relied on them heavily, and then you had some games where like you just use the menu for touching like menu options, and like, woo, crazy. And so I thought that maybe it would go by that way, or even, you know, there were even games that utilized those features, for example, going back to the DS, that utilized touchscreen, for example, in a way where it made you mad, because you're like, I shouldn't be using the touchscreen for this. I should literally be using the D-pad for this. Why am I using the touchscreen? You just like want to like incentivize people to use the touchscreen? Like, can you give them the option to use the D-pad? This is making my experience worse. And so that was kind of the background for going in to seeing the Playdate, and it's arguably gimmick. It is not a gimmick. A lot of games use the crank really, really well. Like, it adds to the fun. It feels very much like, you know, the mat in DDR, the steering wheel in arcade racing games. It has a naturalness to it where it is implemented. And funnily enough, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that people who make games for the Playdate are fans of the Playdate, are members of the community, and therefore you are making things in a way that you would enjoy playing them. And a lot of them have the option to switch as well. Like, you can use the D-pad instead of the crank, you can use like A and B instead of the crank. So it's incredibly well implemented and well used. In games that use the crank, I usually just leave it on that option because it's often actually so well implemented. The playtesting stuff is also, I'm sure, really helpful. I'm sure people playtesting on their Playdate device and giving feedback, and that feedback being taken into account is also incredibly helpful in designing something that ultimately is a joy to use. So no, I don't think it's a gimmick. I think that it is a feature. I tried to like section off a, improvised ramble, and I failed in the last minute, shockingly, but kind of just to tag on to the mindfulness aspect. So I really appreciated the fact that the games for the season are released weekly. Now you can be absolutely unhinged and just download them all at once, but for me, it really gave me an opportunity to be like, okay, this week is dedicated to this game. And, you know, I think that's something else that kind of harks back to physical games, because unless you were a very specific type of person back when games were only physical, you would probably buy like 1 or 2 games every so often and you would play them, and once you've gotten what you can out of it, that's when you would go and buy a new game, or if it was something coming out that you were really excited for, there was a lot more thought that went into it. But now digital games can be so affordable, which again, this is not a complaint. This is like, it is definitely a blessing, but it's also just, this is how things are. And so we end up with a digital hoarder situation. I have games on like my Steam account where I'm like, where did I get this? What is this? Definitely this is a problem with Epic Games because they do the free games, and like I will go into the Epic Games library and I only have free games, and I'm just like, who are you people? Well, I don't know who you people are, to the extent that I have made double purchases of games. I bought Death Stranding for PS4 physical version, so I don't necessarily regret it. But then I realized I had Death Stranding on Epic Games. Yes, I know I should play Death Stranding. So having that time built in is very helpful. And in that sense, it also kind of forces you to try to enjoy the game. That sounds like I'm throwing shade on the games, but you know, have you ever like started playing a game and you're like, oh no, this game has XYZ, I really don't like that, I'm done. And you know, especially with digital games, like if it's on Steam and you just like refund it, right? But with these, it's like more like the TV show that your friend says, no, look, it gets better, right? Where if something you're like, this isn't my type of game, for example, a great one for this is Saturday Edition. But Saturday Edition, when I first started it, reminded me a lot of point and click adventures, and arguably it is to an extent a point and click adventure. And I don't like point and click adventures. If Saturday Edition was available to me with a plethora of games, and I like launched it and I played it a little, I'd be like, not my thing, and I'd close out of it. However, because of this weekly structure, I was like, well, this week we have Saturday Edition, so I'm gonna play it. And I only had to play it a little bit longer than like my initial thought of, I don't like point and click. It is one of my favorite games from season 1. It is so good. It is like, it's so good. It's so good. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but it's so good. And I just, like, I don't necessarily even want a sequel to it, but I really want a similar game to that from the devs. One final thing to note is price, because that was actually what stopped me from buying it for the longest time. And actually the reason I was able to buy one is Playdate doesn't have, it might have changed, but Panic's Playdate website doesn't have any sort of pay in 4 structure. You don't have like Afterpay or Klarna or Affirm or any of those. And I can totally understand why, because they do take a cut from the company that they are serving. And that sucks, especially if you add to that already payment processing fees and everything like that. But we are literally living in a timeline where you order tacos and then you're like, can I pay in 4 for this? So that was really hard for me until I think Afterpay or Affirm, one of those has a pay in 4 like kind of credit card that you can submit a sum to and then use it. And so I was able to do that, and that is how I finally got to afford the Playdate. So yes, it is expensive. One thing that frustrates a lot of people is the fact that the price has continued to go up. But to me, that's actually indicative of honesty in a company, because their prices have gone up due to the price of parts going up. And when prices of parts like go up and prices seem stagnant, like either that company is like so good and so kind and like taking a loss, or they're selling at such a markup that they can afford to make a little tiny bit less. You know, it's a lot, something that happens, and kind of we're used to it in like the US especially, and you know, just a lot of Western countries that I've noticed is very different in East Asia, like in Japan, China, and things like that, is our sales. Our sales are insane, like 60% off because it's Wednesday. Well, how can you afford that? The reason you can afford to do that is because you are marking things up so much that you can afford this. Of course, a lot of that also relies on things like child labor and sweatshops. Anyway, I can't find it in my heart to fault Panic for the price of the Playdate. It does not feel unfair, but I cannot fault anyone for saying it's too expensive, because that is a lot of money today. And like I said, I really had to think about it, and I really had to wait for there to be a pay in 4 option that I could use with it. So it's ultimately comes down with, do you have the money, and is this something you want to spend money on? Because also, let's be real, like different things command different sums to us. I have been procrastinating buying a second case fan for my PC, despite it being $30, and since I needed it to now, I have spent probably hundreds of dollars on video games that I haven't got around to playing yet. So, you know, bit of a but get your priorities straight, me. But in terms of is it worth the price, I think if you are the type of person that I talked about at the beginning of this video, then yes, you will have a blast and you will thoroughly enjoy it. Well, I've certainly had a lot to say about the Playdate, huh? So if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching and or listening. I would love to hear if you learned anything new or if anything changed your perspective on maybe how you viewed things. If any of the games that I played over were ones that grabbed your attention, I will leave catalog links to those and itch.io wherever they are in the description. A big thank you to Panic for creating the Playdate, for taking the risk to create something that has evolved into having not just amazing games, but a beautiful, delightful, inclusive community. And thank you so much to the people who are making games for the Playdate, for the people who are part of the community. It's just, I'm not like super active in the Playdate Discord, but honestly, it is like one of the most wholesome spaces. So a lot of people there also like join without having a Playdate. So if you just need to be around some wholesome people, thanks again for watching. If you'd like to support me making ramble videos and non-ramble videos, which are the greater part of my videos, you can always head to my Ko-fi and donate. Any couple of dollars is awesome. Thank you so much to anyone who has donated to my Ko-fi, who subscribes to my Ko-fi, or even bought anything from my Ko-fi shop. You guys are the real MVPs, and don't forget, you're always welcome at Cool Uncle's house. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!